Thank you for watching, liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing right now. Hello world, I'm Chris Pirillo, and you're watching another episode of CPU, which is short for Chris Pirillo. You decide what the U is short for because you are the only you I care about. And I also know that many of you care about gadget reviews, even though that's not really the thing that I've ever done. Ever. I mean, I play with hardware, but I'm not much of a reviewer. I like using this stuff and talking about this stuff, but reviews come few and far between. That's just one of the reasons that technology is just a part of my life, not my entire life. So today we'll be reviewing the iPad Air 2. Because I asked you what you'd want to hear in an iPad 2 review from me. iPad 2? Did I say iPad 2? I meant iPad Air 2. These names are getting confusing. It's the latest iPad. That's all I can really say, because they keep changing the name, and who knows what name they're going to go with next. I've had every single iPad that Apple's released. And if you were looking for a spoiler, I really like the iPad Air 2, but it's still not for everybody. Archivist42 writes, I recently bought an iPad Air 2. So far, it's been a lot of fun to use, and it feels extremely responsive. The only thing I sometimes wonder about is if Apple should consider a 16:9 ratio screen iPad for people such as myself who watch a lot of video. I wouldn't want them to remove the 4:3 option, though, as it is a very versatile format. My feelings about that are pretty strong. I do not want Apple to change the aspect ratio for any iPad, no matter what its size happens to be. I think the iPad Air 2 is very well serviced by the same aspect ratio, maybe not the same resolution, but when you have so many apps available in the App Store optimized for this particular kind of screen, well, why would you want to ruin backwards compatibility? If, like most people, you prefer the 16:9 aspect ratio for watching videos, why not use AirPlay? I can't necessarily say that it's a downfall of the iPad for having a 4:3 aspect ratio. Or, let me put it to you this way, it definitely has not curbed sales by any stretch of the imagination. I also don't believe that lacking a 16:9 screen aspect ratio is damaging the iPad in any way. I mean, not physically damaging, I mean damaging its potential in the marketplace. It's working well enough in 4:3. It could boil down to a matter of preferences. My preference is keeping app compatibility because there are so many apps available for the iPad. Every iPad, including the currently latest and greatest, the iPad Air 2. Kippy Roo writes, Hi Chris, not sure if Diana has an iPad 2 as well, but if she does, would you mind doing another chatty style video with her like you did for the iPhone 5S? I found that really useful as a girl who doesn't really understand the technical side, and I think Diana's needs are similar to my own. Not to do her a disservice or be sexist towards either of us, but I enjoy a woman's point of view balanced by your own more technical input. Thanks. iPad 2, iPad Air 2, what's the difference? Well, the iPad Air 2 is newer, but for most people, I think they're serviced pretty well by the iPad that they currently have, unless that iPad doesn't have something that they might need. There are two things I really appreciated about the iPad Air 2. One is the Touch ID system. So incredibly convenient to be able to log in to your iPad by touching your thumb to the sensor. The second thing I really appreciated was a boost in speed, but also the doubling of RAM, which absolutely made this iPad the most responsive ever. But Diana's still using a classic iPad mini, the first iPad mini that Apple had released, and she's pretty well serviced by that directly. For the most part, she still uses her phone on a day-to-day basis, and if she wants to watch video, she's probably watching it on TV and using her iPhone to use AirPlay to beam it onto the television in front of her. The iPad is nice for her to have, but it's not necessarily a necessity. She might enjoy having the iPad Air 2, but I don't know if she would necessarily need it. And that's the thing about the iPad, the entire line of iPads that Apple's released. If you're not having an issue with your current iPad and it's running all the apps you need it to run, there's really no rush to upgrade, necessarily, unless you're addicted to Touch ID. I actually found myself a bit frustrated moving between the iPhone 5S and the classic iPad Air. Well, I'm calling it a classic because now it's the iPad Air 2, that's the latest generation. Because the first iPad Air did not have a Touch ID sensor, and I'd be sitting there for a minute or two before I realized, oh, that's not a Touch ID button. So is an iPad Air 2 nice to have? Yes. Is it an absolute must-have? Not necessarily. And thank you, by the way, for appreciating that chatty-style video that we've done in the past. I'd like to do it again at some point in the future, it's just that we really haven't had the opportunity lately. Adam Toms asks, in terms of the iPad Air 2, do you feel the 2 GB of RAM makes a significant improvement to the performance of iOS 8 in comparison with older iPad models running iOS 8? In a word, Adam Toms, yes! It makes a massive, massive, massive difference. That's one word, I just said it 3 times. It's massive. A big difference. Animations are smoother, transitions are smoother, just about everything is smoother. Not to say that I've become a fan of iOS 8, but it's certainly a bit more tolerable on the iPad Air 2. I was definitely not thrilled with iOS 7 or iOS 8 on previous generation iPads. I really do not want to beat a dead horse. If you want to hear my thoughts on iOS 7 and iOS 8, you can watch another one of my videos. It was a nice step for Apple to make, and it was long overdue in my estimation. Of course, who would say, there was too much RAM in that device? I'm guessing there's someone out there who would say that, but not me. I am not privy to any insider information. This is not a rumor, but I would imagine that Apple's going to bump up the RAM in the next iPhone too. It was a boost in performance, especially for someone like me who notices all the small things. iOS 8 is just not performance optimized yet. Ryan Bragg asks, opinion of having Touch ID on the iPad Air 2? Is it needed? I kind of addressed this question earlier, but just to recap, yeah, I think it's needed in an iOS device, but is it needed for you to use an iPad? Not necessarily. If you're not used to a Touch ID system at all, then you don't really need one. But if you're used to it, then I think you're going to appreciate having it there. It's fast, it's convenient, and it's reliable. Raul Madeira asks, do you think that Apple is doing enough with iOS on iPad? iOS 8, my old nemesis. Let's just say that the only feature I want in iOS 9 is a cleanup of iOS 8. For the most part, I'd say that they're doing enough from an operating system point of view, and really with Apple, it's not just about the operating system, but how that device interoperates with the other devices that it might have in its ecosystem. The iPad interoperates pretty well with other iOS devices, iPhones, or devices running OS X, Macs. I can't imagine Apple having any gaps in iOS, but if there were a gap, a perceivable gap, it might be better filled by third-party developers, people who release apps for the App Store. Do I want Apple to do more? Yeah, I'd say that about any company. Do more, but do it well, because it's not the feature, it's the implementation. And that, I think, is my biggest issue with iOS 8. A good feature set, but it's still very rough around the edges. And I'm not the only one who's been critical about Apple's direction with software lately. We've got a lot of people wondering, what happened to quality control? So, is Apple doing enough with iOS, QA, and QC? No, hardly. But does that keep me from enjoying my iPad Air 2? No. I enjoy it just as much. It's a balance. It fulfills my needs, but it could be better. Then again, does anybody know of a perfect device? I hope not, because then why would you ever want to upgrade? I like upgrading, but I also like software and services that run well. Benjamin S. Dorsey. Is the lighter weight worth an upgrade? When I first picked up my iPad Air 2, I put it directly in the case that Apple made for it. And this is probably one of my favorite iPad cases ever. And I've never really liked the cases that Apple's made for their products. You could probably read the spec sheet and tell me if it's heavier or lighter, but ultimately it boils down to what you're doing. I mean, are you carrying your iPad with you everywhere? You might want the lightest one available. Is it a big difference? I don't think it is. Then again, if you want a lightweight iPad, I'd push it towards the Mini. And yes, I do have a real iPad Air 2 in here. I haven't really been showing you because, well, you're here for a review. You're here to hear my experiences, my opinions. And you've probably already seen millions of screenshots and videos highlighting the hardware, if you haven't actually touched one yourself. Every ounce counts. Well, for some, they just want the thinnest, lightest, fastest thing on the planet. For most people, I don't know if I'd say the weight itself, or the lack of weight, would be worth the upgrade. But it kind of depends on what you're upgrading from. Giannis Regas asks, Chris, Apple states that iPad Air 2 has faster wireless than the previous generation. Can you check on that, please? Yes, by the spec sheet, it is capable of connecting to the latest wireless network standards, but in general use, I'm not sure if I felt the difference between the iPad Air 2 and the iPad Air, previous generation iPad, at least in terms of networking speeds, for how I was using it. But then again, I would say that you should always upgrade to the latest wireless standards on your devices, as well as your wireless network at home or at work. You are never going to hear me say you need to connect to a slower network. It's never going to come out of my mouth, apart from the time that it just came out of my mouth right then, to say that it's never coming out of my mouth. Again, I'm sure there have been plenty of benchmark tests posted to the internet, but ultimately it boils down to real-world experience. And remember, just because your device supports the latest networking protocols doesn't necessarily mean that your network supports the latest networking protocols. So you gotta have them in parity. And as long as one exists here, well yeah, then you should get the other one to match. If you're looking for an easier way of monitoring what's happening on your network on your iOS device in real time, check out the app, Vidgets. Ryan Mastrelli asks, how is the sound and would someone upgrade from the iPad Air and why? I would say in my experience the sound was ample, but I've never really been blown away by the built-in speakers in any iOS device. If I'm listening to anything on an iPad, it's usually connected to some kind of Bluetooth speaker, an external speaker. Should you upgrade from the iPad Air? Well, it depends. Do you notice any kind of lagginess with iOS 8 on the iPad Air? Then yes, you should upgrade to the iPad Air 2. Do you want Touch ID? Then yes, you should upgrade to the iPad Air 2. Are you limited in budget? Then no, you shouldn't. Unless, of course, you sell your old iPad to make up the difference, or sell a ton of other gadgets. People are sometimes surprised to find out that I don't really hold on to a lot of technology. It loses value pretty quickly, but that's why I like it. I love upgrading! James Ward says, I personally would love to see what you think of the Air 2. I have just upgraded to the Air 2 from the new iPad, the iPad 3, and I would love to see if you have similar feelings towards it that I do. I'm not looking for a validation of my purchase, rather to see if someone I respect would see things from another angle. I'm right there with you, James. I believe that the iPad Air 2 was a solid upgrade from the first iPad Air, if only because of that 2 gigabytes of RAM that they put into the system. It really did make a difference to these eyes. And of course, the bump in processor speed didn't hurt as well. Is the iPad Air 2 a good upgrade from any previous generation iPad? I believe so. But that does not mean that I'm saying everybody should rush out and get one. Some might wonder why it took me so long to do this review. It's because I've been using the product. Rushed reviews aren't really reviews. They get their hands on a product, don't really use it in real life, and it's not a review. I'm actually using this thing just about every day. I'm also not exaggerating when I say that it's probably been one of the better iPad experiences that I've had, if only because it's been the fastest. Frayne M. Queehee III asks, I would like to know if the iPad Air 2 is just a thinner iPad Air 1, or are there viable upgrades that make it worth buying? I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record here. I really do think it's worth upgrading, because the 2 gigs of RAM really makes a difference in system responsiveness. So much of the experience for me is not just the hardware and how it looks and everything that it has built into it, the specs. It's the software, it's the service, everything combines into an experience. And if you've seen one up close and you can't see the difference, then you shouldn't be upgrading. Then again, you're talking to the guy who's had pretty much every iPad that Apple's released, at least the standard-sized iPad, not the iPad mini. I was never really a fan of that. I mean, it's nice and everything, but I'm not the demographic. Who is the iPad Air 2 for? Someone who uses the iPad daily or close to daily. Someone who has another product from Apple. Someone who hasn't upgraded their iPad in a few years. Who is the iPad Air 2 not for? Someone who already has an iPad they hardly use. Someone who is budget conscious. Someone who doesn't have any other Apple product. Not everybody needs an iPad. Not everybody wants an iPad. But I think everybody could be happy with an iPad Air 2. There are 2 types of people who look for reviews. Those who are looking for your opinion, and those who are looking for you to validate their opinion. So, I hope you appreciate the way I approached this particular review, basing it on my experience. That's all I've got. Thank you for asking me the questions that you're asking. Thank you for supporting me in every way you possibly can, including the patrons who got to watch this review behind the scenes ahead of time and got all sorts of other bonuses at chrispirillo.com. At this point, however, I'm going to leave you to your own devices.